Hello, welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to amplify design and impact at scale with DesignOps. Hi, Damian. Hi, Mauro. I would like to start with this tweet from Pavel Samsonov. He is a user experience lead at Amazon Web Services. He proposes an interesting dialogue between the product manager and the developers, and he tells us something like this. The product managers start saying, our designers deliver these pixel-perfect mockups, and the engineers reply, okay, we'll try to build it. Sometime later, the product managers come back again and ask, why doesn't it look like it did in the mockup? Surely this situation is familiar to several of us, and that is because as engineers, we usually make decisions that are not reflected in the design, either because we do not know how to do it or because we do not have the level of detail that a designer would have. So how do we go about dealing with the handoff between design and development? For that in GeneXus we focus on three pillars: tools, in this case input from Sketch, people and processes. This in the industry is becoming known as DesignOps, and that is the methodology that we're going to talk about today. We're going to see a little more about this and each of them. In terms of tools, in August 2019, when GeneXus was in version 16 upgrade 5, we began to integrate Sketch as a tool to generate objects from a design. And what I want to tell you about this is how far we've come to date, to October 2021, a few days after releasing GeneXus 17 Upgrade 6, having gone through 24 versions since we started with Sketch. First of all, we did a redesign of the input from Sketch dialog, where developers will be able to preview not only the visual part of the design, but also everything related to the structure of the objects that are going to be generated. We also designed a Sketch plugin that you can download and install to include not only the design file when exporting it, but also all the necessary resources for this to fit well in the GeneXus knowledge base. Sometime later, Sketch added the embeddable sources within the design itself, and GeneXus incorporated that as an additional feature in the import process. Various improvements were also made in the positioning and sizing of the controls in order to better reflect the design in the objects. We also added a mechanism to support multiple layouts. This means that the designer will have a strategy where they can draw the same screen, but on different platforms. And GeneXus is now capable of interpreting that as if it were a single object with multiple layouts. Sketch also added color variable as a way to respect the same color scheme throughout the application, and GeneXus incorporated that as part of the color palette. We also added support for various complex controls such as the application bar, the navigation tab, and so on. Sometime later, Sketch announced Sketch Cloud as a form of exchange with the developer, although it is still only CSS, which does not apply, for example, if we are working on native platforms, or at least the passage from that design to something native will not be so trivial or so seamless. But what's important is that there is a new file format, Sketch Cloud, and we also incorporated that as a support at the time of importing the design. We also added support for the design system object to replace the old themes objects as a way for you to start with the latest GeneXus technology. All this added to more than 30 improvements that we have made over this time to improve the quality and power of the import process from Sketch. Great. Having the right tool, the second important point is people. If we analyze design a little from the designer's perspective and from the developer's perspective, we can say that there are two different worlds. From the designer's perspective, the design looks much more like the final product. However, most of the time it lacks the necessary structure and componentization for it to be scalable and future-proof. From the perspective of the GeneXus developer, the design is undoubtedly much more abstract and has that structure. What unites these worlds then is that structure. If we look at the design, which is made by a designer who does not intend to import into Sketch, they don't care so much about the name of the layers and how they group things together and how they componentize, and that is key to be able to design to import for Sketch. We have learned from working with the clients that there are three important keys when it comes to people to achieve a successful interaction with Sketch. The first one is that designers know the tool in depth. New generation tools such as Sketch and Figma not only allow but promote the fact that the design is structured and componentized. The second point for the design to be successful and the import of Sketch to be successful is to have designers who can think in systems. Those designers who structure design based on design systems or component-based designs. And the third key point is the relationship between designers and developers. We have changed the way of working, and this implies many more responsibilities on the designer's side. What they design in this methodology of working has a direct impact on the GeneXus development KB. So it is very important that this is done well. To improve this relationship between them, we have developed a methodology that we will see below. As Mauro said, in terms of processes, we have learned to develop a methodology based on experience both in terms of the development of internal applications using Sketch and GeneXus, but also based on the experience of our customers. The first one is what we call learn and test. So what we have here is we take a subset of all the screens that we want to import and we begin to iterate with the designer to achieve a good result. As a first point, what we do is the designer gives us a prototype of the design, which is what we're going to try to import. And in parallel, we're going to try to define the nomenclature that the designer is going to use to name the layers, either in terms of casing, in terms of standards for naming the panels and controls, and also giving semantics to those layers. For example, if the designer gave us a form where a user must fill in all their data, then we want each of these fields to have the prefix called user, for example. So that is information that we must give to the designer so that they start naming the layers in a way that will serve us later to maintain the system. Basically, what we have now is a common language between developers and designers. Having that, we begin to adjust to import the panels and that we defined as type panels. For that, what we do is we check a list of best practices that we have documented and check a list of conventions to define controls. As for example, if we want to define a button, the convention is to name the layer as button or also the group as button. Both this final convention checklist and the best practices checklist can be found at genexus.com/DesignOps. Once we are satisfied with all the settings, we export using the Sketch plugin and send the file to the developer. Once we have the design in our hands, what we are going to do is to import that design into the knowledge base. The objective will be then to verify what was generated from that design, whether it is in terms of panels, stencils, styles, etc. Everything that would be the static part of the exported design and how it looks in GeneXus. But we are also going to run that application to see it and see if we detect any errors that must be corrected. In case we detect any errors and we're not satisfied, then what we do is pass that design again with the corrections to the designer. And we repeat this cycle as many times as necessary for the designer and the developer to start learning from one another. Once we reach the stage where we are satisfied with the results, then we move on to a second phase. We call the second phase creating a complete module of the entire application, or it can also be the complete application in case it is moderately small. To do this, we as developers are going to define two things. On the one hand, the definition of the panels, and this is because designers tend to draw the same screen several times with slight variations in the interface. So we as developers are not interested in that. What we are interested in is having a single screen, and then we're going to make all the changes in the interface through code. On the other hand, we have the issue of images where a similar problem occurs. Designers tend to draw iconography in a single variant when perhaps we need two or more. A typical case is when we have two variations. For example, we have the selected image and another one that is an unselected image. The designer will usually draw just one of those. What we have to ask the designer then is to draw both for us, because that is what we're going to take as input to be able to change it later in the application at runtime. We also have to define which images are going to be static, that is, which images are not going to change during the entire course of the application, and these are going to be translated into image objects within the KB. And also which images are going to be dynamic, that is, which are those that are going to change, for example, if we have a user's profile, if we have the user's picture, we will get that from a database. We can also get it from a previously defined service or whatever, but these are images that we know are going to change. This information must be available to the designer when adjusting the screens. And once we have the definition of the panels and we have the definition of the images, together with that, together with what we defined in the previous stage in terms of nomenclature, we proceed to adjust all the screens of this module or of the application if it is small. This is the biggest task of the designer, and they have to design and adjust screen by screen, module by module. Again, we follow the best practices that we have defined in the documentation, and we follow the conventions checklist for each and every one of the screens and controls, in addition to following the nomenclature that we defined in the previous stage. After we have all this ready, designed and adjusted, we schedule a meeting with the developer for the next stage. In this meeting that the developer should set up, the objective will be to define if all those checks that we have done in the previous steps are okay, but above all, we must pay attention to the structure of the design. We as developers have the know-how of how to structure the application, and precisely we have to transmit that know-how to the designer so that they can componentize and group the layers in a way that is convenient for us. In case we're still not satisfied with the design, then we go back and ask the designer to make all the necessary adjustments to complete this cycle all over again. We meet several times until we have something that we feel satisfied with, and we move on to the last stage where we're going to integrate that module that we created. For that, we're going to ask the designer to export that design and send us that file so that we can import it into the GeneXus knowledge base. Then, as we did in the previous stages, we're going to do the same. We're going to check that panels, stencils, styles, and all the GeneXus components are okay. And we are also going to do a running test to see if we detect any errors. If we see that we're not satisfied and that the tests were not satisfactory, then we return to previous stages and repeat the cycle as many times as necessary to have something that we're satisfied with. Once we are, only then are we in a position to start with developing the application. Remember, anyway, that the import process already leaves us a functional prototype. All the fields will come with the examples that come directly from the design, and then the developer should simply change those examples for real data that will be shown in the application, either by consuming the services that we have previously defined or using the transaction scheme that we have in our knowledge base or whatever. But it is only then that we can start truly with the development process. So based on these DesignOps methodology, having the knowledge and the correct tools, having people with the right knowledge, and having this methodology that allows us to connect those people in their different roles, we can say that that line that separated the two worlds of design and development disappears to create a common place to work together. And well, if we remember Samsonov's tweet a little, what is the dialogue missing to answer that last question asked by the product managers? Precisely, what is missing are the designers saying, we too must be part of that process. With GeneXus, as we have seen during the presentation, it is much easier to create a synergy with the designer to integrate them into the development team, and that will not only simplify the layout design in GeneXus, but also every change that the designer makes in their design will have a direct impact on the GeneXus knowledge base and therefore on the generated application. That was all we wanted to tell you about. Remember to visit genexus.com/designops for more information. Thank you.